Take a little breath there.
Yeah.
How do you feel?
Good. I mean, it's funny. I used to.
Here, wait.
Thank you. I used to finish that piece, and it would be very. I would go into kind of like a dark place, I guess, and even maybe it still happens. I feel like the piece collapses or rises. But lately, I get to the end and I want to laugh. And I don't know, it's not because I'm just happy it's over, but I think it's just this journey. The piece is really a journey. And I think it's okay. I always think I'm going to say this to an audience beforehand and then I forget, but I think it's okay to kind of check in and out for a little while. Like, if you nod it off, it's like okay, you know? As long as you weren't snoring. Actually, you know, Cage wouldn't probably be. But I think that that's okay. Like when I first started studying this piece, I would try to like read through the score with recordings, and I would get like tired. I would get sleepy, and I would think why I couldn't even really understand why I was trying to learn a piece that made me so, I don't know, go into this trance. I haven't figured that out yet either. But the more I grow with it, the more it turns into a journey for me. And there are parts that I think he, sort of like a Cy Twombly painting where there's a lot of stuff and then there's a big blank area where he lets the eye rest. I think that happens in this piece too, where you'll have just a million notes in one beat and then you'll have a measure of silence. I think what's fascinating about this piece is that, whereas later that might have happened for Cage because of a chance procedure, in this piece, he's choosing the silences. This is the measure where I want to put a silence. And you know, I think that's really why this piece resonates with me, because I like the choices he's making. And he was a very emotional composer, making emotional decisions and using his ear. And I think that's a challenge for the pianist to sort of understand where he's coming from. Because it might sound random, or for the listener to understand where is this coming from. And I think that's why it's maybe important to talk just that little bit about the fact that he made these choices. For instance, if it's a later piece where it's chance procedures dictating the outcome of the rests and the dynamics and all of that, it might let the listener, for lack of better words, off the hook. Like, I don't like this piece, and why should I? He didn't even choose the notes. You know, why should it resonate with me in any way? I'm not saying that that's the way to hear the pieces that come later, but I think that this piece adds that challenge of, well, why we have to think, well, what is he doing here? Why did it take him 2 years to compose this piece? He said, as it says in the notes, he found these sounds as one finds shells on the beach. This is someone who's truly using his ear and writing all these notes. I mean, these are very important things to him. These dynamics, they all mean something. So I think that's what makes this piece very interesting. And it's a summary of his work to this point in a way, because after this, like 2 years later, he's writing 4 minutes and 33 seconds, which is the silent piece, even though it's rarely very silent.
I think that's the first piece I became aware of when I heard of John Cage, is that
4 minutes, 33 seconds?
Yeah, he's not playing anything. This guy's weird. He's just silent.
When I start, people think that's what I'm doing, but I'm really just scanning the piece. Like, do I remember this?
Anybody think he was just going to sit there for an hour?
Yeah.
It was a little bit of that, wasn't there?
I like that. I like
maybe a little
bit. A little scary thing.
And I want to get some of your reactions, both visceral and any questions you have for Adam as well. But that was my first experience in hearing about him. Where did you first hear about John Cage?
I think it was that, too. I was reading, I came into music seriously pretty late. I started pretty young, but I was not I have a lot of my students are here, which is so cool because I was totally like bribed through 10 years of my piano lessons with Burger King and stuff. I mean, I wrote this, like I owe my life in music to a double cheeseburger, but it was good. But it took
whatever it takes.
Yeah, whatever it takes. So try that, adults in the room. But later on, I got hooked into classical music, but I started to get really fascinated by composers who chose difficult sounds. Again, like I'm into this choice thing, like, which is why I kind of gravitate toward music from sort of the mid-century, where composers weren't really going back into the serial like systems and stuff like that, serialist systems. So But I was reading a book on minimalism because I started to just look at a lot of American music that I liked, and I really was getting into minimalism, and the first thing I saw was this 4 minutes and 33 seconds. But at the same time, I would kind of skip class in high school, and I would go into this room in my library that just had hundreds and hundreds of records. And it's still the records that I heard in that library room. It's still the repertoire that I play. In the 50-state tour, it was all the composers I did were from that room. So it's like I went to IU, I went to Indiana University, studied, and then like once I got out, I was like back to high school, you know? Went back to all the composers that I really wanted to do. So it was on one of those dusty old records that I first heard that really fun, like, Sonata No. 5 that sounds like the drum circle. And I would call my friends, and it was sort of like my first feeling of being an ambassador of new music. I was like, come, you have to hear this. This is a piano, you know, and it sounds like this. It sounds like drums. And in a way that kind of not very sophisticated approach to introducing people to music is sort of exactly what I'm still doing. Like, I still think it's like, this is cool. It's a piano, you know. But that's how it was sort of, I both read about 4 minutes and 33 seconds, but I also listened to this record. And right then I thought, this is very cool. And it was like, I think it was the premiere recording from a long time ago.
So I just want to bring you into this. Any questions or reactions? Yes, we're nice and loud.
Hi.
OMG, oh my God. Yeah, process question. I mean, this isn't bar talk or, I mean, how do you approach grasping, approaching, and memorizing a piece like this without benefit of a prepared piano, to me?
Just because we're recording, just the process and memorizing and developing and making this piece your own.
Yeah, and especially in terms of using, this is written for a piano that you can't really just approach any piano and start playing these pieces. You could, but it would be very disorienting later, I think. The 50-state tour I mentioned actually kind of has to do with this question, because when I was in conservatory, I was a very nervous performer, and I tried learning my scores lots of different ways, maybe through just doing it a million times, or I would really go in and analyze it harmonically, and then I'd wonder, why did I still fall apart? I knew that was a G7, you know. But I was a very nervous performer. But it also, when I was preparing for this tour, for which there was like no funding, there was no plan either, which is why there was no funding.
Funny how that works.
Yeah, exactly.
Taking notes on that.
I was working all day to try to raise money, and I was like subbing at a high school, I was teaching piano, and I was working on a construction site. So I would bring my scores with me for this modern music, and I would have to like look at the score and think, and actually Frederick Chu, who played in this series a couple months ago, he introduced me to the idea of memorizing and finding patterns on a visual way. We had to, you know, so I started with that. And then later, after the tour, I was sort of stowed away for a summer in California. I was, again, working not really in music at the time. I was working at a vet in Malibu. So it was like Britney Spears' cat, and like, I know I'm going way out, but but it was very surreal. But I brought this.
I'm good with all of this.
Barbra Streisand's dog. So anyway, I would bring the score to work with me, and all I had at the time was this silent keyboard that I had traveled the 50 states with in my car, like this apparatus that I'd built. But I thought, like, this is the perfect opportunity. I'm here for the summer, and I have this John Cage score, which I bought, and have this silent piano. Like, this could work in a weird way. Let's see if this could happen. And so I did. And so I started with this last line, and every day after that, I would get to like the preceding line, and I'd think like, this is the line I can't do. You know, like, this is the one where I stop, too crazy. But I would find a pattern. Like, it's funny because it was all on silent. And even here in New York, I have an upright piano, so I can't prepare it at home. And so even last night, every day I'm silently doing this piece, like pantomiming the whole thing. Like, it's really weird to watch, at least. But yeah, but I use the silent piano, and that's what helped. And so some of these chords, while they sound really odd, their figuration on the piano, it might be like, you know, a perfect fifth, or like an actual functional chord. It's not functioning in any kind of harmonic sense in terms of conventional harmony, but I could recognize the chords, and I would kind of try to find any pattern I could, or a rhythmic pattern or something. And that's how I built this piece, like line by line. And I didn't think it was going to happen, but it did after.
And how long did that take?
It took 9 months, but I wasn't really incredibly disciplined. Like, I moved and took a break. Like, I moved to Texas, and so there was a couple of weeks where I stopped. But the first time I did it was at Rothko Chapel in Houston, and it was one of these instances, like everything else I do, where I set a date, and then I'm like, oh my gosh, I have to do this now. And so that lit a fire under me to finish it, and it was really amazing. But I could do the whole thing from memory silently before I ever prepared my piano.
And I was delighted and surprised how beautiful certain sections were.
Yeah, I think it's oh, also, if you want to hear this again, you can Google my name and like free album or free John Cage, something, and you can get a free album of this piece if you want to hear it again. And it helps to hear it a couple times. Like, I hear a whole arc to it, and I know where I think the certain points of emotional interest are. And I try to make that happen more often than not. But I do think it's a really beautiful piece with really beautiful sounds. I mean, he has sort of this harmonies working with, he has overtones working together. Like, he has overtones in counterpoint with each other. It's really odd. Like, you'll have one note resolving to the harmonic of another note somewhere else on the piano. I mean, this is really brilliant stuff, especially considering he might have found every note as one finds a shell on the beach. But once you change one note in this piece, think of like a matrix or something, where you change that, it changes that note for the rest of the 20 movements of this piece. So it might work really well here, but it might really ruin that moment over there. And so, again, it took 2 years for him to do it. It makes more sense to me.
Just want to remind you to pass your the forms to this aisle. Is that right, Tim? Would that work, West? Either aisle. The people pick them up and we'll do the drawing. Yes, Tim McHenry, the producer of these events here at the Rubin.
So back when you came here, you were attracted, and that's why this first question is interesting. You were attracted by the idea that we're doing this whole series on memory right now.
Yeah.
We're going to play this piece of memory, of course. And so that
Yeah, I mean, I think that I just happen to do this piece from memory. I mean, but I do a lot of, I think everything I do in concert, I tend to do it from memory. At least I try. And more often than not, I think it's not going to happen. I just did a David Lang piece. He's a living composer, amazing composer who's part of the Bang on the Can group. And I memorized a piece of his, and I thought it wasn't going to happen. And then it just does. I mean, but I do it very meticulously, line by line. I'm not like a manic practicer. I'm not, a savant who's like just memorizing, oh, that was the 14th cough today. I'm not really doing that. I just happen to approach.
Except it was the 14th.
I know,
today.
right? Well, yeah. She did a throat clear early. No, so it was. But I tend to approach music that way, but it's because I kind of trained myself to do that. I mean, I'm not going to be doing that with other things. So it's interesting. I surprise myself. And when I start doing this piece after maybe a year's time, even I get in front of the piano and I think, oh, wow, am I really going to do this? So there's sort of the mind that's very emotionally engaged with this piece and tapping into it on an emotional and rhythmic, and kind of there's a memory of the moment when I learned it. But then to sort of say, like, what's the third measure of, the Fifth Sonata? Well, I can tell you that, actually. Anyway, so...
Anybody else? Yes, right here on the second row.
Just listening to it, it sounded like there were little parts of it where it was really hypnotic. It reminded me a lot of like gamelan orchestras, which got me thinking about the scales. Like, all the things that you put in there, does that change the scale?
Yeah. So. The stuff, you can just put even one material in there and it might turn one note into a chord, for instance, which happens a lot. And actually, the less you put on a note, the more you'll transform it. The more you load up a note, the more you'll kill the note, honestly. So it definitely affects I'll be playing a scale, but it doesn't sound like a scale. So this preparation only works for this piece, really. I mean, this is like the instrument for the sonatas and interludes. But yeah, I mean, Cage at the time was hugely influenced by, before this, he was a percussion composer, and that's what he defined himself as. What's interesting is I was reading a late essay of his, or a late speech, which I'm actually going to do next month on the 5th, you look it up on the internet. I'm going to do this lecture called Composition and Retrospect. And even in 1982, so he was going to live maybe 10 years more, but this is the late part of his career. He was still calling himself a percussion composer. So he was approaching the instrument, I think after a long time of discovering the prepared piano, he was engaging it in an emotional way. And this was a time when he was coming out of a severely emotional period of his life. He was divorcing his wife. He had just met Merce Cunningham. His whole world was in upheaval. And he was trying to reconcile his music with his series of nervous breakdowns he was having, which I say, some of us don't even have one, you know. He was having a couple. But one thing that helped with that was Eastern philosophies and Eastern religions. He finally sort of settled on Zen and Buddhism, and he kind of let it fit his own, he sort of fit it to his needs. But this piece was a little bit before that, and he was more looking toward Indian music and definitely toward gamelan. And it's no accident that it sounds like that. That's kind of the point I keep driving. It's not, it's not an accident. He really wanted it to sound like that. And those moments where things are very repetitive, and where we go for maybe a couple minutes of hearing the same thing, those to me are the most important moments of the piece, because again, he catches you. If one is checked out for a little while and, zoning out, whatever, it's the repetition. And at the end, when it's so still, even if people are kind of zoned out, that moment will bring you back, because it's that stillness or that kind of dirge-like repetition. And I was saying before the show, I think that's really important, even for the listener. It sort of brings us into the moment.
Take one more? Yes, go ahead.
I take it you needed music before you did these pictures with this from there. So can you talk about how you put that together?
Yeah, well, one thing, when you said I knew this music, what's interesting is when I started learning this piece, I didn't have a very aural image of the entire piece. So while I was doing that silent piano regime for all those times, I would constantly have the piece playing, different recordings of people playing it, just so I could start to hear little fragments happening again, because it's 20 movements, but it kind of starts to blend together, So that's how I just wanted to kind of add that too. It was a very unconventional way of learning this piece. But yeah, when we went through the exhibit, I was very much drawn to the idea of maybe representing those 8 permanent states that I mentioned at the beginning, with them all leading to tranquility, those 8 permanent states. So we kind of looked with our eyes toward what can really fit this idea of fear. Where is the erotic? Where is the grotesque? And that helped us do it. From a historical and Cagean standpoint, I didn't really want Buddhas, because this wasn't when he was doing that. So there was sort of the musicological aspect of it too. I really wanted to find the most Indian, so just sort of the Hinduistic element as much as I could. I wanted to bring that out with the 9 permanent states.
So we walked through the museum and had these 9 states in mind, and we would look for things that resonated with Adam, that said fearful, erotic, wondrous, in different parts. And I instructed him that it could be a full image, a full painting, a full tapestry, or it could be just a little section. So I took notes on all of his sort of gut reactions of what he had with the different images based on the different pieces. And then improv'd my way through adding each of these 20 pieces. I assigned it a certain image, in addition to incorporating the images he gave me. We didn't really go through this, but anything that didn't look like it was really in this museum, those just sort of white and yellowish, those were actual Cage images.
Yeah, those were Cage.
The one that was like a little coffee cup stain, which I don't know that that's what it is, but that's what we were calling it, was by John Cage. The one with the little floor on the bottom was all John Cage, and then of course the scores. So I just put them all together, and then we met earlier today, and I said, this is what I came up with, and we made some changes, and I just followed along as much as I could. I think I was I was mostly with you.
Yeah, it was awesome.
I actually have a little button right over there. I was making the changes as I was sitting with you. So
Incidentally, looking at the score, I would get messed up. I was like, no, it was awesome. I mean, it was really cool. I think it's really also, some people someone did a live video mix once when I did this piece, and some people really weren't into it. They didn't really like it. But I think it's great. I think it's great to find as many ways to engage people with Cage's music. There's no reason that you need to just watch me on the stage. And Cage would be the first to say that. I mean, he would sometimes have simultaneous pieces going on at the same time. Again, not with this piece.
At the same time, though, I prided myself on letting it sit for one image on 5 minutes, because this is the show. It's not like, hey, look what's going on the screen. Forget this guy. You know, it was really about this and supporting the music with some sort of visual
Totally
image.
cool.
Well, that was my goal anyway, too. All right. Thank you so much for coming.
You.
Thank you. Thank you.